First story, The Girl Without Eyes. It was a crisp fall night in the quiet town of Elkwood when I found myself standing outside the old abandoned school. They called it Thornhill Academy. It had been shut down for years, ever since a fire claimed the lives of several students. Rumors spread about a girl who haunted the halls. They said she had no eyes. My friends, Ethan and Josh, dared me to go inside. "Come on, Maddie," Josh said with a grin. "It's just an old building. What are you scared of?" I wanted to prove I was brave, so I agreed. Armed with flashlights and Ethan's old Zippo lighter, we snuck in through a broken window. The moment we stepped inside, the air felt different, heavy and cold. The flashlights flickered as we moved deeper into the school. Long dark hallways stretched ahead of us, their silence broken only by the creak of our shoes on the dusty floors. Suddenly, both flashlights went out. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered, clicking his light frantically. It was no use. Josh pulled out the lighter and flicked it on. The small flame cast shadows on the walls, making them dance like ghosts. We turned a corner and froze. Standing at the end of the hallway was a girl. Her dress was charred and torn. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, and her empty eye sockets seemed to stare straight through us. Ethan screamed and ran. Josh grabbed my arm. But the girl was suddenly right in front of us. Her cold hands grabbed Josh and dragged him into the darkness. His screams echoed and then vanished. I don't remember how I got out of that school. The next thing I knew, I was outside, panting and alone. Ethan was nowhere to be found. Josh was gone forever. Later, I learned the truth about the girl. Her name was Charlotte Gray. She had been a student at Thornhill, trapped in the fire that consumed the building. Her body was never recovered. She still searches for her eyes and for those who dare to invade her resting place. I never went back to Thornhill. Sometimes, though, I dream about those empty eye sockets and the echo of Josh's screams. And I wake up wondering if Charlotte is still waiting for her next victim. Second story, Shadows of Crestwood High. It started on a cloudy October morning when I first walked through the doors of Crestwood High. The school was an old brick building in a quiet town in Illinois, its hallways filled with the echoes of footsteps and whispers of long-forgotten students. I was a transfer student, knew the area, and I could feel the weight of curious stares as I tried to find my locker. On my first day, I noticed something strange about Crestwood. The teachers seemed on edge, their eyes darting towards the dim corners of the hallways, as if they expected something to emerge. My classmates were friendly enough, but their voices lowered when they spoke about room 217. "Don't ever go there," one girl whispered to me during lunch. "It's been sealed off for a reason." Curiosity got the better of me that afternoon when I found myself alone in the north wing. The lights flickered above as I walked towards the forbidden room. The door to room 217 was chained shut, but a small glass window on the door offered a glimpse inside. What I saw made my stomach drop. The room was dark, but there was a shadow moving slowly across the floor, as if it was alive. I told myself it was just a trick of the light and hurried back to class. But that night, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. I decided to ask around the next day, and one boy, Mark, finally gave me answers. Years ago, a teacher went missing in that room, he said. They never found her, but some say her shadow still lurks there. Determined to prove it was just a story, I convinced Mark to help me get into room 217 that night. We snuck into the school after dark, our flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. Breaking the chain on the door, we stepped inside. The air was icy cold, and the room was filled with the smell of damp and rot. Then we heard a soft, whispering voice coming from the corner. Our flashlights landed on a dark shape that seemed to rise from the floor. It was a shadow, but it moved as if it were alive, stretching towards us. Mark screamed and ran out, but I was frozen in place. The shadow wrapped around me, and for a moment, everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in the hallway outside, room 217. The door was chained shut again, and Mark was nowhere to be found. I tried to explain what happened to the teachers, but they just gave me knowing looks and warned me not to talk about it. I transferred schools a week later, but Crestwood High never left me. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still feel that shadow lurking just behind me. And at night, I dream of room 217, its whispering voice calling me back to the darkness. Third story, the haunted halls of Fairview. Fairview High School stood at the edge of a quiet Midwestern town, a monolithic brick building with cracked windows and ivy creeping up its walls. I never understood why it remained standing, abandoned and forgotten, long after the last student had walked its halls. But everyone in Fairview knew the stories, and no one dared go inside. It was my senior year, and my friends, Kyle and Jessica, had dared me to spend an hour in the old school alone. I laughed it off at first, but when they started teasing me, calling me a coward, I caved that night. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my phone, I pushed open the heavy front doors. The air inside was stale and cold. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the deserted halls. Graffiti covered the walls. But beneath it, I could still see old posters for proms, sports games, and clubs. The memories of hundreds of students seemed to cling to the building like a phantom. I wandered deeper into the school, the beam of my flashlight illuminating classrooms filled with broken desks and faded textbooks. The stories of Fairview High played in my mind. A fire in the science lab had killed a teacher and 2 students back in the 70s. People claimed you could still hear their screams on quiet nights. I shook off the chill that ran down my spine and turned a corner. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible, but distinct enough to freeze me in place. Get out. The voice was low, raspy, and closer than I liked. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness, but The hall was empty. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. I told myself it was just my imagination and kept walking. As I passed the gymnasium, the door creaked open behind me. I paused, debating whether to look inside. The dare was to stay an hour in the school, not explore every room. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped into the gym, my flashlight cutting through the pitch-black space. The bleachers were rotting, and the basketball hoop hung crooked from the ceiling. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even lower, and my breath came out in visible puffs. That's when I saw them. 3 figures standing at the center of the gym, their faces obscured by shadows. My flashlight flickered and then went out. Panic set in as I fumbled with it, desperately trying to get it working again. "You shouldn't be here." The raspy voice came again, this time closer and angrier. The figures started moving toward me, slow and deliberate. I dropped the flashlight and ran. The halls seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways I didn't remember. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more urgent. Finally, I burst through the front doors and collapsed on the steps, gasping for air. When I looked back, the school was silent, dark, and still. But as I walked home, I could feel something following me, just out of sight. Fairview High might be abandoned, but it's far from empty. And now I understand why no one goes inside. Some doors are meant to stay closed.